Hello all, I'm Namrata from Oges. Welcome to second Oges webinar on oil price, calculation, prediction, and impact. Through this webinar, we are doing a new experiment where we have tried to connect a global audience of the size of 400 plus to eminent speakers, energy leaders from 5 different countries. Oges has been the most preferred global platform for oil and gas knowledge sharing, where you can ask oil and gas questions in any domain and get answers from experts in the industry. Thank you all for your kind support so far. I'm honored to introduce you to our esteemed panelists, those who have seen this oil price taking its peaks and lows and have made significant contributions to the industry. So we have with us Dr. Mike-Lynch, who is President of Strategic Energy and Economic Research, an MIT-based consultancy. He has held a number of research positions at MIT and was Chief Energy Economist at DRI WEFA. He's currently blogging at Forbes, and we are very soon going to witness his new book on the peak oil scare and the coming oil flood in June 2016. Then we have Dr. Serene, who has extensively worked with numerous Canadian, Romanian, and international companies. He has also served as principal advisor and export to more than 15 companies like Lukoil. Dr. Serene is also an author of several scientific research and educational works, including global bestsellers. We have Dr. E. with us, who is former SP president, a PhD, and a consultant with more than 35 years of experience as an executive and research scientist in petroleum industry. She has also worked in Chevron's worldwide university recruiting and was specifically honored for game-changing contributions to the petroleum industry by SPE. And it would be very interesting and privileged to hear her about her new book, A Guide for Dual Career Couples Rewriting the Rules. She's coined this word herself. Also, we have Kygoras Belarus, who's one of the founding members of the Thomson Reuters Oil Research and Forecast team, and Kasper Sanderby, who is heading projects at AH Industries, and is also leading delivery for OEMs in the industry. So, thank you to all the eminent speakers and panelists with us today. Thank you for your time, and we are looking forward for a very insightful session, just like our previous one. Mike, can you take over the mic and start? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. If we can go to the next slide. It's always fun talking about oil prices because it's such an uncertain topic. You can get a lot of different opinions from so many people, and in the short term, almost any price is possible, so almost any forecast is actually not necessarily unreasonable. In the longer term, the economics of the market are a lot clearer. Um, I often hear people say, oh, prices are random or stochastic, as the economists like to say. Uh, the truth is they are not, but they're very complex. The factors that move the price in the short term, like weather, GDP, are very hard to predict. Um, you also have the question of the what is the lowest price? What is the bottom? Sorry, yeah, right there. Okay, what is the bottom? It can be very low. You can produce oil down to $20–25 a barrel, not invest new oil, produce it. The big thing is the traders decide what the price is in the short term, and you don't really know what they're thinking. That's what you need to guess. Uh, Government policy is also much more important in oil than almost any other commodity. For one thing, you have the question of what is the Saudi view of the sustainable price? What is the possibility that others will become involved in cutting production, trying to raise or lower prices occasionally? And you need to realize there's always a possibility of a new oil spike. So if we can go to the next slide. Several years ago, in 2014 actually, the survey of forecast. You can see if do we have the next slide? Yeah. That the typical forecast when the price was 100 was that the long-term price would stay at 100. I was practically the only person calling for lower prices at that time. Sorry, can we get the next slide? And you know, the thing is, obviously I like to brag that I was correct, but what was more interesting was that so few people thought it was even possible for prices to go down to $50 or $60 a barrel, even though historically that was very much the norm. Price forecasts tend to move with prices. People occasionally will forecast sharply rising prices, but rarely do they forecast that prices will drop significantly. The next slide, please. The current market balance, if you look at the IEA's forecast, the expectations are that demand will be weak, and the Chinese economy is the most important factor there. And then non-OPEC supply, especially in North America, is projected to drop significantly. This is primarily shale oil production. And the implication is that the price will actually balance. If we can go ahead to the next slide, actually skip the next slide and go to the next one. Okay, one more. I think one of the dominant factors in the market right now is that inventories are extremely high. We only have data for OECD inventories, but they're running 300 or 400 million barrels above the normal level. That is going to take a long time to run down to bring the market back into balance. It's one so many people have thought that the price might go to $20. And why some people are worried we'll see another drop in the near future. Next slide, please. So just to reiterate, Chinese economy, will it strengthen or not? Shale oil in the U.S., where's the bottom? Iranian supply, Iran has returned increased its exports with the lifting of sanctions, but it's not clear how much supply we'll have and when. They have talked about adding 1 million barrels a day by the end of the year, which would meet almost all the new demand that we're expecting. And I just want to mention the political uncertainties. Venezuela is seeing a lot of instability at the moment, and it's entirely possible we'll see some kind of labor unrest, for example, that would cause their production to shut in. It's entirely possible that Libya will show us a little more supply, but that's not clear. Now, shale gas is a very interesting question and maybe tells us something about what will happen to shale oil. In the U.S., shale gas was booming, and the price of natural gas dropped from $8 to about $2, and at the same time, drilling dropped by almost 80%, and people thought shale gas production would drop off very sharply. It did not, mainly because people managed to bring the cost of shale oil, the drilling costs and the fracking costs down sharply, but especially because they got much more gas per well, and a lot of that was because they moved from areas like the Barnett up into the Marcellus and Utica, and you had a lot more gas coming out per well. And the question is, can shale oil do the same? If we go to the next slide, please. This shows graphically what happened. The red line is the natural gas price. The green line is the number of rigs drilling for natural gas, and the blue line is shale gas. It has production. It has recently begun to come down slightly, but if you tried to model drilling and production, you would get some very bizarre results. Now, we've seen the same drop in shale oil drilling. We'll see if we go to the next slide. The question is going to be, will we see the same kind of production response? Most people don't think so. Shale oil is a little harder to produce than shale gas because the molecules are bigger primarily. But the question is, okay, $1 shale oil is booming. What will happen if the price were $50? Again, we've had a variety of cost estimates. Are frankly out of the ballpark, suggesting that no shale oil is in fact economic, and we have seen drilling drop very sharply, and almost everyone thinks that the break-even cost for shale gas is about $60. One thing that confuses the issue is you have a lot of small companies whose costs are dominated by their debt levels, that is, their interest payments, not the drilling costs. So the bigger companies are saying at $40 we can make good money, whereas some of the analysts are saying, no, you need $60. Next slide, please. This slide it's a very rough calculation done by the U.S. Department of Energy. It's sort of the number of barrels per day per rig active. The important thing is you can see it has risen very sharply over the last 6 years or so. It seems as if we're going to see a huge boost in the Permian, that's in Texas, as well as the scoop and stack plays in Oklahoma that are just starting to drill now. And these seem to be maybe 3 or 4 times as productive per well as in the Bakken. True, it's possible at $40 we'll see a recovery in shale oil production. Next slide. This just shows the rig count in shales, and again, you would think, oh my God, this industry is just is it dying? The drilling industry is dying. The production is not dying, as we saw in the case of shale gas. Next slide. And especially the big question is, are we going to see the Permian pick up and take over from the original shale, Bakken, and the Eagle Ford? Now, you see there was a lot of Permian Basin production early on. That was mostly conventional production. The the data does not actually separate that out very well. So next slide. One of the things that confuses people is they'll look at a supply curve, and this is just one typical one, and they'll say, oh, the cost must be equal to, the price must be equal to the marginal cost of supply, which is the highest supply. That's not always true, but it's also the fact that if the price goes down, you stop doing the high-cost projects, and so the marginal cost will go down. So instead of the cost being at the D level, it can be at the C level with relatively small amounts of change in supply. And this tends to confuse a lot of people in the industry who kind of convince themselves that the price will remain high enough to cover their costs. Next slide. So, yeah, there we go. So, what do we need to see the prices restored? Well, if the Saudis could be convinced to cut prices, to cut production, that would bring prices back up. I mean, we've come back already up to 40, which I think is pretty strong and maybe premature. But if the Saudis cut production 1 million barrels a day, that would help to stabilize the market. To do that, they either would need to decide, well, I guess it's an and. They need both to feel that the current market weakness is temporary, and therefore it's okay for them to bring prices back up, that their production will be restored later, and they need the smaller members to assist, preferably also with the non-OPEC producers, because I think the Saudis are simply concerned that OPEC members will always come to them and say, okay, you fix it, the market's weak, you take care of it. They don't want to see that. If we see continued weakness in shale oil production, I think that will help restore the market balance or a demand boom, as I mentioned. A lengthy outage in Venezuela would eat up the supply overhang, the inventory, but it's not really clear we're going to get that. We're still waiting, to see. I mean, it's such a mess in Venezuela, but it's hard to predict what will happen. Finally, I'll just say that ceiling on prices is going to be the cost of shale oil production. I think that's somewhere around $40 to $50. This slide here, thank you, shows the Saudi production, and you can see that when we've had price collapses, one time was because Saudi market share and production was under pressure. Once was because of OPEC cheating, that is, other members were cheating and the Saudis came on them. Now, Saudi production is still very high, but that doesn't mean that they're not, well, we've already seen it. So that suggested, well, on the one hand, they to cut back. On the other hand, they are still worried about rising production from Iran and Iraq. Next slide, please. So this just shows you a couple of the forecasts from some of the majors, the major analysts. Sorry, next slide, please. And you can see that they're kind of all over the place. And I do want you to just keep holding in mind that short-term prices are very uncertain. Yeah, that one. Thank you. Uncertain. Almost, there are a lot of people with opinions. Okay, we skipped one. That's fine. This shows the government forecast, and you can see, again, the price forecast tends to move with prices. In the short, will move up again now that prices have come. The main thing is you always want to be flexible and open-minded about the prices. Don't become convinced that a given price or a given price forecast is reliable. And then finally, the final slide just shows the cover of my book, which who knows if it will change. I make the main point that there's a lot of oil out there, and I think the prices will remain moderate for the long term. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Sorin, for your long-term and short-term view that you have told us about the economical and political angles shared. Now we go to Dr. Sorin. He'll let us know about the various bilateral relationships and the political issues that are shaping the market dynamics currently. Dr. Sarin? Till we get Dr. Soren's audio back, we go to Dr. Eve. Hi, Dr. Eve.
Hi.
So she'll let us know about a very crucial point about shale and workforce and many other interesting things about the market oil cycle and the impact that it makes. Dr. Eve.
Thank you. I come at this issue from a different angle than Mike Lynch, since I worked as a technical expert and executive and manager in the industry. So one of the things that's often said is oil is found first in someone's mind. And as we develop new technologies, that tends to drive the price down in absolute terms over time. So I tend to be pessimistic about the cost or the price. What's happened here is that a whole huge tranche of reserves have come into the market that previously people were trained to ignore. So they're vast new resources that are being opened up. Previously, we assumed that after oil matured, it migrated. And it's a huge revolution to say that most of the oil never migrated and is still in the source rocks, and that we can produce directly from the source rocks. So one of the things, and while I'm waiting for my slides to come up, is that having worked in the industry for 35 years and been retired several years now, I feel as if I have the oil price engraved on my brain because of how it impacts those who work in the industry. And next slide, please. So when you look at these two curves, as was mentioned, I was former president of the Society of Petroleum Engineers. These are the demographics in time of the society. And if you look at them, they're drastically different. So oil price impacts the hiring and the attrition in the oil industry tremendously. And through much of the history of this industry, we have had a very non-uniform age distribution. So when I entered the industry in the late 80s, there had been very little hiring done for 20 years because oil prices were very low in the 1950s and 1960s following the discovery and the bringing on production after World War II of the vast resources in the Middle East. So I was, in many cases, the only new professional on many projects with less than 20 years of experience. What then happened was you had a boom, and they rapidly hired many people before the bust. So as soon as the bust occurred, top management began talking about the fact that they would have an age gap, but the economics meant that they couldn't afford to hire very many people. So what you see in the green curve in 2005 is what the demographics in the industry looked like after very little hiring between about the mid-1980s, and in some cases the early 1980s, and the early 2000s. Shift forward to 2015, and you see kind of the remains of a double hump system, where what's been happening now are those people in their 50s and later are rapidly retiring because the odds that they will still be active when the oil price turns around are low, and new hiring has returned to a crawl. So you will again start to see a hump move through. And it's not a message that's popular, but you can also look at the statistics on enrollment in petroleum engineering, particularly for the bachelor's degree. And usually the number of bachelor's degrees awarded in petroleum engineering lags the oil price by about 2 years. And enrollments plummet when students find it very difficult to get employment. Next slide, please. When the next slide comes up, what I want to discuss is how the fact that it's not just a change in age that we're going to see with this change in demographics. The younger workforce looks different than the older workforce. So in my generation, which are those people in their 60s and upward, there were very few women. And the women in the industry were proving, in a very real sense, that they could do a man's job. What's changed dramatically is if you look at the percentages of those from their mid-30s and down, is that amongst the youngest group, about 32% of those are female. This has changes in many different ways. We can visibly see the great increase in women. But in the next slide, I'm going to discuss something that's not immediately obvious. And that is that years ago, many women felt that in order to have a career, they could not have children or be married. I was an exception to that, where I have children and I've been married for over 40 years, is that the younger women and younger men are increasingly part of what I call a dual career couple. And in particular, the dual career couples that I think are the most different are those in which each person in the household contributes between 40 and 60% of the household income. The old way that the oil industry worked was management wanted, and this is how management was trained and groomed, was frequent relocations around the world and being told on very short notice that they needed to relocate. When both people in a household work, that's not easy, because if both are contributing about half to the household income, it's difficult for the family to sacrifice one of the incomes. When management looks at young people, they often assume that the woman has a problem, but they tend to mirror themselves on the younger men and not immediately guess that they may also have a mobility problem. And I consider this to be a form of invisible diversity, that the workforce has changed So not only as in this webinar, where we can communicate and interact very effectively all around the world, but we also have a workforce that's different, that doesn't have as easy geographic mobility as in the past. And I have a book that will be published by Prager in June of this year, looking at dual career couples, how they differ, and these invisible diversity aspects with guidance for them in terms of how to interact with management that may not appreciate this huge demographic change. And with the collapse in the oil price and the attrition in the older people in my generation, a larger and larger portion of the workforce is part of a dual career couple.
Thank you very much, Eve. And I hope the audience got the point and the importance of workforce in the soil cycle and the concept of dual career couple and how to manage those things changing the lifestyle of individuals in oil and gas community. And yes, thumbs up to women power. Okay, now let's take, do we have Dr. Soreen back with us? Dr. Soreen? Dr. Soreen? Can we hear, can we have you on stage? Yeah, yes, we have Dr. Sorin with us. Hello, Dr. Sorin.
Yes,
Yeah.
hello to you as well. Hello again. Hello to everybody. So I come to my matters of great importance regarding the oil and energy from a different view, my private view. So if we can get the next slide, if possible. Okay. So as you know, the oil prices are falling, and they are now into the region of the lowest levels in dimensions. It is pretty difficult to predict whether the prices will stabilize or further drop, yet this decline coupled with the fall of the ruble exchange rate, including Russia's economy, which collapsed, the economical growth and stability of Russia as well, because internationally, globally, it's a matter of balance between those two players. What kind of international solutions can be found in the areas of long term? So everybody is claiming that one could be a bigger stock market, and an answer could be found in Frankfurt, in Germany, because recently Canary Wharf and Berkeley Square from the City of London, they are going to merge. They are going to make a joint venture with the Deutsche Börse, as I mentioned to you before, with the German stock exchange. So the oil prices are falling for the complex combination of causes. The USA has propped up its supply of shale. I'm talking of gas shale, gas production, and hydraulic cracking internationally. So I'll be very particular concerning the project of Chevron in the eastern part of Europe for both onshore and offshore. So Arabia, the biggest producer and the political heavyweight within the OPEC, have chosen not to slash production, and thus this is not a favor to the USA anymore. Such option as a choice is in fact having a negative impact on Russia, even more on Iran and Venezuela, two ex-opponents of the USA, as we all know, because New York is back, the Iranian National Oil Company. In other words, Shanghai Tower 1 and Tower 2, they are ready, able to support Japan's strategies from now on in their common project with Russia, because the Russians just failed recently in China. The next slide. Okay, so one word has to be said by the Russian Council, RIA, the Russian International Affairs Council, who is directly the main player and the coordinator of Gazprom, Lukoil, Calvec, Sibneft, and Rosneft. And very soon, number one in the entire world will be Rosneft. They will overcome Gazprom. This is live. Okay, next slide, please, if you don't mind. In Europe, the alliance between the German companies, and I mean Walter Energy in Hamburg, which will be directly involved for delivering the supplies, and I mean the commodities, and not only the commodities, from the Northern Sea to the Main River, Danube River to the Black Sea, with a hub for the Caspian Sea region, including major international players like Gaz, Lukoil, Murov 1 from Astana, and Sokar, the national state-owned company of Azerbaijan. They are already involved in the area with Turkey. As everybody can know, including from the official statistics from the Department of Energy in the United States, they already operate successfully Ceyhan Harbor, which is the biggest refinery in the area of the Mediterranean. Baku Tbilisi-Ceyhan is a major project involving the price, the levels of the crude oil, as well as the prices for the petroleum products, including mazout and kerosene, connected directly with the Russian leverage in Europe for both ports, for Genova in Italy, FOB for trading and shipping, and Rotterdam in Holland. What else? Next slide, if you don't mind. So, this year, 2016, there has been a lot of talk about a merger between the stock exchanges in Vienna, whose group also includes Budapest, LAC, Hungary company, Ljubljana, Slovenia, and Prague, Czech Republic, and Warsaw, Poland. But their combined market capitalization would be no more than 350 billion euros. That would more than 420 million US. That is slightly more than a third of São Paulo Bovespa. Later on in 2015, the Warsaw Stock Exchange has announced its intention to suspend any merger talk, but nevertheless, it will remain, as today, a small and mainly local force. The conclusion is as follows. Everything will be steady. Everything will remain at these levels. I mean, the major international strategies overseas. The big players will stay in their position, and there is no other new company or project but the companies in Texas, and I mean Hams Oilfields company in Texas, the Brotherhood, and Exxon. Unfortunately, some British company, they just vanished from the eastern part of Europe, and there is no such a view, not a possibility to make joint ventures with the Russian and international companies already in the Caspian Sea region. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Suri, for your inputs and regarding major projects that are going on worldwide and companies' moves, strategic alliances, and negotiations happening around the world that are changing market dynamics. Thank you very much. Now we have Mr. Belarus with us, who is into forecasting and oil price research. And will tell you about the new reports that he has launched in the market. Mr. Valeris?
Yeah, hello. So my name is Georgios Valeris. I'm part of the oil research and forecast team within the Thomson Reuters. Our primary objective for the last couple of years or so has been to monitor oil flows. So we track vessel movements and we generate aggregates, either exports or imports, depending the country. My personal focus being in the Middle East, I look into the MENA and OPEC, the Gulf OPEC members. So what we've seen recently in terms of trade, we've seen OPEC exports picking up. They stand at about 1.1 million barrels a day higher compared to this time last year. Most of the increase is from Saudi exports, but there's a lot of Iraqi oil as well, and some of it comes on the back of Iranian increased exports. For February specifically, we actually saw some weakness in the Gulf OPEC members, but that was offset by increased exports from Latin American producers and African producers. Particularly the case of Venezuela was interesting. There was a spike of about 200,000 barrels a day in exports, most of which ended up in the U.S. and China actually. Now, in terms of the shifting dynamics in Asia and who's buying oil from whom, we've seen Asian buyers sticking with Saudi oil primarily, although there's been an increase in Russian ESPO loading off from the Cosmino terminal, and there's been a hike on Iraqi crude as well. Basra have been increasing. In the case of Saudi exports in particular, we've seen something like 700,000 barrels a day increase from 2015's average, well, year to date in February. Interestingly, with increased exports in Europe and Africa. In terms of Iraq, we've monitored limited exports in February. That's because of the sabotage in the Kirkuk-Ceyhan pipeline. There weren't actually any cargoes leaving Ceyhan in February. However, Basra, the south terminal of Iraq, has been posting strong exports. We expect that to remain the case. We actually expect to see more oil leaving Basra, headed primarily towards Asia, but some of it may end up in the U.S. as well. In terms of Iran, we actually we saw a spike on Iranian exports in January with the lifting of the sanctions. A lot of the floating storage went out of storage and actually found homes in Asia mainly. But February, we didn't actually see a continuation of the trend. February exports from Iran fell by about 300,000 barrels a day to 1.4 million barrels a day. Overall, it seems that the Iranian exports have increased somewhere between 2 to 250,000 barrels a day. That's actually quite far from what they were claiming. I mean, in terms of production, it's not exactly clear how much production has increased, but the commercials, they don't really seem able to regain their market share, not as fast as they were claiming to or hoping to. Anyway, the Iranians have pushed towards the Mediterranean. They've actually, well, not just the Mediterranean, Europe. There have been some parcels that left Iran and ended up in Romania, France, and Spain. It seems that the pricing for European buyers actually is quite aggressive compared to other Gulf producers. So there's a lot of potential there. But in Asia, they don't seem to be sort of provoking the other main exporters. So the pricing has stayed fairly moderate. I mean, they haven't tried to undercut Saudi official selling prices or anything like that, which is good for prices. It offers support. If they would try to undercut competitors' prices, I think we would probably see the 20s that Goldman Sachs and other banks called earlier this year. In terms of the Iranian upstream, no, let me touch on their economy a bit. I mean, it seems that they've managed to diversify their economy to a fair extent compared to other countries in the area. Anyway, after the sanctions, they had recession for a couple of years, but already in 2014 they managed to bring their economy back to growth. And even in 2015, that was the case, although growth was slower. But they weren't as much as affected by the crash of oil prices as other economies nearby. In terms of the upstream, they have announced about 50 oil and gas projects. We're expecting a new Iranian petroleum contract. I think it's scheduled to be sort of presented to the wider audience in April. There was an event in London, but that was cancelled. I mean, it goes unsaid. The geology is good there. They're going to need a lot of capital, external capital. But I think people would be happy to get into Iran overall. So, I mean, from a supply growth perspective, I think we can expect a fair amount of oil coming from Iran in the coming few years. Although not as quick as Iran claims. I think that this development project, they will probably take a while. Looking at Iraq's example, a few years back, it took them a while to ramp up production. Even with BP and Lukoil pouring billions and billions, it took a while. Okay, there were violence issues, but it's not this. It requires time. It's not as quickly done as Iran would hope, I guess. So in terms of this year's production from Iran, I think we could see more than 500,000 barrels a day increased by the end of the year, more like probably towards something between 500,000 and 1 million. Now, overall, just to wrap up in terms of the trade flows and everything, as I mentioned, they haven't really tried to regain their market share. They've been quite, their approach has not been very aggressive. So it has, I mean, I think what the strategy here, they realized that if they would choose an aggressive sort of strategy in regaining their market share, they would probably force prices to go very low. That's not in their interest. So I think they're consciously they've decided to take a more conservative approach in regaining their lost market share. Yeah, that's all from me.
Okay, thank you very much, Gabaris, about your data, super rich data, insights regarding the inflows, exports, and imports. Before we move on to Casper, let's try a few poll with our audience, since now we have a lot of factors in knowledge and inputs from our panelists. Let's have a quick poll. Okay, you'll find this on your screen. Yeah.
Next.
Hmm. Okay. The panelists may vote too. Yeah. So 45% of our audience says the link between natural gas and crude oil will strengthen, and 55% say they are independent. Interesting. Here another one. Eve will take care of this. Okay, so 100% to the power of shale in US for unlocking new resources. Okay, that's very interesting. Here we go for the last one before we talk about renewable energy impacting oil price, and this is the most interesting. Okay, we have a big no for this. Thank you for your kind inputs. We now go to Casper. Hi, Casper.
Hi.
Hi.
So my name is my name is Casper Sunderby. I'm the head of projects at AH Industries. I've been working within oil and gas business before, and now with the wind renewable energy company, delivering EPCI projects and EPC projects for the OEMs, and formerly for the producing companies. So we're now discussing, will renewable energy have an impact on oil prices? And as we go to the next slide, we'll have a look at how things seem to look. This slide shows the energy consumptions worldwide. And if we look at that, it's a steep increasing demand of power as third world countries have a larger demand. So the problem we are facing is how are we able to supply these people with enough energy in ensuring that demands are met. On the next slide, I'll show you the percentages on how we are delivering the energy for the people's demands, and as shown here, the percentage of supply is more or less the same, even though the amount of energy is increasing, the percentages seem to be the same. So So do we think this will impact the oil prices that we are delivering even more wind power or renewable energy power to the people? I think not. In this case, first world countries or developed countries will have a grid for power where we will be able to supply renewable energy to the consumers, whereas third world countries do not have that grid in place. And when we're looking at that, the price of constructing a grid able to supply the consumers far out in the fields will be quite a significant cost, and I do not think that we will be able to supply these areas with renewable energy. If we go to the next slide, we'll have a look at what the production prices actually look like. If we look at coal and natural gas, whereas the prices for production is quite low compared to the wind energy. So what we see is that it's a choice to deliver green energy to the people, and hence this is a political choice. One should have a different look at would third world countries be able to pay that price, or should developed countries be taking part of that? And this is a political discussion. I have no interest in that, but my point is that production prices for wind power is quite a lot higher than it is using hydrocarbons. So in this case, my point would be that I do not foresee renewable energy impacting on oil prices, as the production prices of renewable energy is significantly higher. On the next slide, we'll have a look at how the energy consumption per inhabitant in the different countries look like. And as everybody knows, the US has got quite a high energy consumption per inhabitant. But the next step in line is Africa, and now we're getting back to the grid and the third world countries. And when discussing that, I think we should bear in mind that the grid is not in place, and as I said before, they are being supplied by local power plants supplying local townships and cities in Africa, and I do not see this impacting oil prices in any way. I definitely see that when we see an increase in renewable energy, this is just covering the delta of the global demand of energy. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your input regarding renewable and the point of view that will the oil, the black one, will take the green one, or the green one will take the black one, or they may both exist together. We'll have to wait and watch. So with this, we end our presentation session, and I would like to thank all the panelists for this such wonderful, rich session, and especially very smooth one. Before we move ahead with our question and answer session, I would like Saurabh to speak a few words and tell us about the new game that we are launching on August. It's a very interesting game on oil price. Saurabh?
Thank you, Navnita. And before I speak on this game of version 2, which Oges will be launching, I also want to thank on behalf of Oges all the panelists who took out their time and spoke with our audience of 411 people, and that two times this day. So I would like to take this opportunity to let you know that Oges will be launching version 2 within next 1 week. And in that version, we are having a game, you can more or less call it a tutorial. So whatever we have learned from this presentation and from our analyst team, we have included few questions where if you give us the assumptions based on the future prices or based on the algorithm which is available, a game will predict the prices of the oil for next few months. And we would like your input on this algorithm uh, which we have made with help of our data scientist Gurpreet. And that's it. I would also like to thank the audience who patiently allowed us to do this experiment of connecting such eminent speakers from 5 different countries. They've all come together to share their thoughts. So if this experiment in the second session, it went very well, and if this keeps on going, we will continue this experiment and will increase the frequency of having such useful discussion which will help our industry to grow. Thank you very much. In fact, I would also like to thank Namrata for bringing such panel together and the audience together and conducting this beautifully. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Saurabh. So we are going to have many such beautiful sessions in the future. I take the session to question and answer to our panelists. The first question that I have on my list is why Chinese economy has so much influence on the worldwide demand of crude. So, Mike, you want to try?
Yes, I think you first have to just look at the raw numbers, which is that over the last decade, somewhere around half of the world demand growth has come out of China. And this means that they are the biggest market and they have the most influence on sort of year to year on the market fundamentals. This is partly because they have been industrializing, that is, moving people from farms to cities and switching from a more agrarian to a more industrial economy. So that there is some question as to when that flattens out. But because it's one single entity and because it's changed so rapidly, it has had an oversized impact on the world's economy and on oil demand and price.
If I may add a bit on this, I mean, I totally agree with what was mentioned by Dr. Lynch, but if we look at the last few years, what's happening, I mean, before the price collapsed, the OECD, demand in the OECD was shrinking, right? So most of the growth was coming from the non-OECD and primarily from China. So people have been monitoring what's going in. And I think a couple of years back, China even overtook the US as the top importer. So with the US increasing production domestically and thereby reducing imports, China has automatically taken the first, has risen to the top of the list over there, and it's a lot of people sort of watch what's happening there. If growth in China slows down, it could potentially mean that global demand growth slows down, so that could be a problem.
Okay. Dr. Sorin, what are your point of view on this? Because you have been into a lot of negotiations with China also. So what do you think about it?
Okay, I'll extend my private opinion. What is China today? China, they have the national oil company for oil and gas, the state-owned company. They have their own oil and energy demand, and in the meantime, they exporting crude oil overseas. According to OPEC statistics, Overseas Private Investment Corporation from DC, they have two international projects. The major pipeline, Russia-China, which collapsed in 2015, And they have Kazakhstan-China pipeline for transporting crude oil, which is about to be stopped, closed operationally. So what's all about? From 2015 up to date, they are steady. They remain at the level. So despite the fact it's a huge market, they will be overcome by Russia in the second part of 2016. And I mean everything regarding oil and gas industries. I mean exploration and production. I mean drilling. I mean storaging. I mean refining, because they not compete with the Western companies. They are more or less about 23 US dollars processing the tons of crude oil in their own domestic refineries in China. So, taking into consideration this fact, additionally to the dynamic of international situation in the southeastern China Sea, with or without Indonesia and Malaysia oil companies, the price of the crude oil will continue to decrease, will touch a level between 34 and 36 according to our calculations today. I'm
Okay.
done.
Okay, thank you. I didn't know about that China pipeline collapsing. Thank you for sharing that info. I have a very interesting question from Lionel, and I'll appreciate any of the panelists attempting this. What is the price prediction for the next 2 years? So, can anyone predict the next 2 years? Was the price up in 2018?
Uh, I, I'll start by saying, can you predict the political situation in Iraq, Iran, Libya, Venezuela, followed, followed by the Chinese economy, the European economy, the U.S. Fed? Uh, the fact of the matter is, if you said what is the possible range of prices, it's extremely wide, depending on those factors, those political elements. In the next 20, I've long argued it's easier to predict 20 years of prices than 2 years. I personally think we're probably not going to go much above $50 or $60 without some kind of massive political upheaval. But I don't think we're going to go below $30 again. But it's certainly always possible. There's a wide range of forecasts out there, and the biggest problem is if you want a particular forecast, you can always find someone who will give it to you.
Okay. 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 So now that's a serious question from Jayanta. Uh, he has asked, what is your view on the meeting which will be scheduled on April between OPEC and non-OPEC? How the meeting can influence oil price? So the meeting is going to happen in April between OPEC and non-OPEC. How will that influence? So my question is clear to the panel?
Yeah, okay. I'll take a stab at it. What matters is, first, what are the perceptions of how the meeting goes, and second, what are they accomplished? If it's a total failure, the price will be down sharply, maybe as much as $10. I think people are expecting some kind of agreement and at least a moderate action. But this has generally proved very difficult in the past, and you have going in countries like Mexico and Norway that previously assisted or cooperated with OPEC have much lower production than they used to. So I think it's going to be a bit harder. The biggest question will be Russia jump in and offer a significant cut, and I think that would bring along the others in their wake. But I don't think it's going to take us to $60 or $70. At most, even a good agreement would give us $50, in my opinion.
Great. So, Jayanta, I'm sure that
And
there couldn't be any sufficing answer for this. And this one is from Ibrahim. He has asked, is it true that oil prices are the reference points for natural gas market? Is it true that oil prices are reference points for natural gas market?
In some LNG contracts, the companies like to link the LNG price to oil price. But in a lot of local markets, they're not tied.
well, if I may, sorry if I'm not interrupting. Some contracts, usually pipe in Europe, they were linked to fuel oil prices, not crude. So there is some indexation over there. But recently we've been seeing that indexation sort of being phased out as natural gas markets sort of gain more momentum. Although they're still correlated. I mean, if one checks Japanese LNG prices with Brent, you'll see quite strong correlation over there.
Okay. So this one is for Casper. Do you think impact of Paris climate will impact the long-term crude prices?
I need to get that question again.
Yeah. The impact of Paris climate meet on long-term crude prices.
Well, as I said before, I actually don't think so. If we look into the future, let's say 20 years ahead in time, the third world countries will be growing vastly, and we will have a much larger middle class in these countries, and they will all have an energy demand. And when we see that, I only foresee that having renewable energy will be covering some of the delta in demand. So actually, no, I don't really see renewable energy going in and impacting on the oil prices. And as Mike said before, actually production prices are for oil and gas is lower than the renewable energy. If we look at renewable energy and take all the CO2 taxes and all that away, the production price is significantly lower for oil and gas than it is of producing renewable energy. Hence that, I don't think so. I think that this is a political momentum that has been established, and it's, to my point of view, of course, it is a positive thing. It's just helping a problem of an increase in energy demand worldwide. So we need to look at this. It's not either or. It has to be both.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Does that answer the question?
Yes, yes. So with this, I give the last question to the lady, Dr. Eve. It's difficult for ladies to travel very often in this industry, and which is very much required in oil and gas. Do you think if we solve this problem, the percentage of ladies in the industry will increase? The traveling?
I don't think the problem is strictly travel. Many women will and can travel extensively. It tends to, a woman's ability to travel often depends upon the age of her children and also how much household help she has. So some women, even with young children, can travel extensively. I think that there are many studies in terms across many occupations that show that there's a lot of residual prejudice where both men and women tend to discount women's credentials.
Okay, okay. So,
May I add something to Eve's response?
pardon?
May I add something to Eve's response?
I can only hear you to response, nothing else. Yeah,
Okay,
you have a great
I would
response.
like to add something.
Okay.
Well, when we look at the European countries and the US as well, I see that women are being more dominant in the oil and gas industry, as Eve was saying. For example, in my household, my wife is in the oil and gas industry and traveling in the oil and gas industry. And I think that basically it's a matter of accepting the equality in the household, and this is a cultural issue much more than it is a ability issue.
Okay.
This is something having to do with accepting each other's roles in the household as equal partners, and this is a development that we will see much more of in the future as the amount of people able to do work in the developed countries are going down, the demand for workforce is going up. And when we look upon that, the women will have a much more dominant role that way around, and therefore it's just a matter of acceptance and cultural development.
Okay. So if you have this dual couple case right in front of an panel,
Oh yeah, living it.
he is living the dual career couple, rewriting the rules. He has written the rules again.
Yes, I think that it affects both people, and it's a whole change, as he said, in terms of what the roles are, both in the home and at work.
Right, right. So very interesting. And with this, I finish with my question list. If there are more questions, I'm sure the panel would be happy to answer on mail, right? Or right? Okay. So with this, I close this session for today. Thank you very much once again to our esteemed panelists, audience, my team for this wonderful session. You can access the recording on our website www.oges.info. Have a great day. Have a great evening. Good night. See you later. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Bye.